try and get through those as soon as possible, so we can get as many of your questions to them. So first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Aurélie from Mars. Aurélie presented the story of their work on the Next Generation Supplier Program that they're doing at Mars earlier this year at a meeting in Amsterdam, and we were all really intrigued by that story. So hopefully you're here, Aurélie.
I am. Hi.
Oh, that's what I like to hear. I knew you were one of the 150. So over to you, Aurélie. And if you want to share your screen, that's absolutely fine, or we can just talk to you. But do tell us what Mars are doing about this and the approach that you're looking to take in the future.
Absolutely. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let me know if that works.
Okay. All good.
Can you see it?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be part of this group today. I met with Oliver and Thomas and who else was there at the M-Progress meeting in February?
Bertrand was there, I think,
was there. Yes. So it's great to see the journey that you've been through, and I'm super excited to talk to you today about the Next Generation Supplier Program. Briefly, I'm Aurélie Gouverneur. I am French, as you can hear it. I'm sitting not in San Francisco, but in Virginia right now. And I've been with Mars for 21 years. I spent a good amount of time in procurement, mainly buying indirects, and I've been now for 3 years in the sustainability team, really charged with a refresh of our responsible sourcing program. So that's what we're naming our new responsible sourcing program. It's Next Gen Supplier. I'll just briefly go through a little bit of about Mars, because I kind of realized that we're not well known as an organization, and we think we're getting there. We're a little bit more, becoming a little bit more public now. But so Mars is 100 years old, more than 100 years old. It's a family-owned business, probably one of the largest in the world. We're on the fourth generation, of the family now, looking after the business. Our purpose, which was relaunched not so long ago, is the world that we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. And that is super powerful, as you can just imagine, for the kind of work that we're driving in sustainability. We are, you can see, of course, the many brands that you may recognize. We have 4 segments. We're a highly decentralized organization, which is always a challenge when you want to deploy a global program in a decentralized organization, and each segment is living and breathing their own ways in a sense. But we have Mars Pet Care, our biggest segment, with a growing vet business associated to that. Mars Wrigley has been the confectionery segment that most people know and love, the M&M's brand and Snickers and Twix. Mars Food has a number of good brands. We've actually just changed the name of our Uncle Ben's brand to Ben's Original. I don't know if you guys knew that or had noticed, but I think the late events in the US with the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd's sad events pushed our diversity and inclusion department to do something about the rebranding for Uncle Ben's. So, and then Mars Edge, which is about improving health through targeted nutrition. So that's Mars in a nutshell. I hope it's helpful for you guys. And further ado, I want to talk a little bit about our sustainability program. So we have something not on mute, I think. People mute themselves. Thank you. So our sustainability plan is called Sustainability in a Generation. It was launched in 2017. Focuses on 3 things. So we have the Healthy Planet corner, where we're focusing on reducing the environmental impact of our Mars facilities, of our suppliers, and our extended supply chain. Looking at water, reducing water use, for instance, and responsibly managing the lands. We have our Thriving People element, which is where we're working on meaningfully improving the working lives of 1 million people in our value chain. That's the commitment that we've made to ourselves. And then we have nourishing well-being, which is where we're advancing science and innovation to deliver healthier meals to our consumers. My program is really placed under thriving people. So Next Gen Supplier, you know, is really the goal is to look after the workers at our first-tier suppliers facility. Yes, there are a few environmental considerations, but most of it is social. So when we look at the social side of sustainability under thriving people, we have three main goals. You know, the first one is to increase income. So we believe that everyone working within our supply chain should earn sufficient income to maintain a decent standard of living. So that's a key focus area. Unlocking opportunities for women in our workplaces, in the marketplaces, and in our supply chains. And then respecting human rights. And that really underpins our ambition to improve working lives from factory workers in whatever, Chicago, to farmers in Côte d'Ivoire. So really the goal is to ensure that everyone feels safe and respected and have an opportunity to thrive in their workplaces. So that is the articulation of the work and kind of like the background of Next Gen Supplier. So Next Gen Supplier program, which is what it is here. It's that very simple pyramid with three elements, and starting, you know, at the bottom part, align is where we inform our suppliers of our standards and expectations. Then up is assess, and that's where we check to see if our suppliers are meeting our expectations. And then in advance, which is the top part of the pyramid, is where we support our suppliers as they take steps to improve their businesses' practices in those facilities. So align, assess, and advance. And if we take a little bit more time for each of them, so for align, that's where we communicate our expectations, and that's, you know, our expectations are spelled out in our supplier code of conduct. We talked a little bit in the subgroup about codes of conduct. So we've refreshed our code. We've tried to make it way more accessible and way more aligned with international standards, like not so demanding, so that people, you know, suppliers feel not unthreatened by it in a sense. What we're doing is we've also automated the sharing of our code. We used to spend so much time administering the code of conduct that it just wasn't helpful. So the automation through procurement processes of vendor creation, of tendering, including it in your purchase order, standard purchase terms, in your written documents that you're buying, but not spending, you know, a huge amount of time tracing signatures of codes, which is not very helpful. Then on assess, this is where we're asking suppliers to conduct an online assessment of their social, environmental, and ethical management systems. And we're using EcoVadis for this. So EcoVadis is a French organization. They've been around for about 10 years. They're now, they have assessed, I think, about 70,000 different entities on their management systems. It's really about their management systems. So asking suppliers, what are your practices? What are your policies? Do you have a policy about, you know, age of your workers? Okay, you do, very good, upload it, show us what it is, you know, is it strong enough? Does it serve the right purpose? So they substantiate their answers and get points for it. And based on the scores that they get back, that gives us an indication at Mars of the likelihood of the risks taking place in their workplace because of the strength of their management systems or their weak management systems. So we're using this to a subset of so the align is for everyone, assess is for a reduced amount of suppliers. We've looked at our categories, and those categories that are most strategic to us are the ones that we've retained to ask those suppliers to conduct an EcoVadis assessment. Roughly, we have probably 40,000 suppliers active. Assess is looking at 3,000 of those suppliers only. So a huge choice of being extremely targeted. Yeah. And it's still, EcoVadis is scalable, so that works out pretty well. And then for advance, it's our new approach that we have developed to replace auditing. We didn't think that the traditional model of auditing was delivering the impact that we were looking for. So we're trying some new things. We're at the early stages, but we have some early promising results. And what we do is Supplier Advance is really focusing on collaboration with suppliers. It's a 12 to 18 month process. We really spend time to engage the suppliers, 1 or 2 months. The buyer is at the table, talks to the supplier. We're really trying to understand what is their reality, what keeps them up at night, you know, like not coming in with an ask, but coming in with a real willingness to understand their situations. And we have third-party experts that are alongside us to help us deploy this program. And we look at management systems with the EcoVadis assessment they will have already done, but we also look at workers and we talk to workers. That's a big differentiation of our program. We have integrated a huge amount of worker voice elements, whether it's worker surveys, worker interviews. It's a very relational dynamic. And we're looking at root causes. We're helping the supplier identify the root causes of why certain things are happening so that their improvement plan is really tackling the deeper issues and fixes them for the long term rather than patching something on the surface and then at the next audit you come back, you find the same thing again. So anyway, that's the that's it in a nutshell. And for advance, it's even more selected, by the way. So if you look at that 40 to 3,000, we're looking at just the top 300 supplier workplaces. We're not talking supplier entities, we're talking sites. Yeah. So really a top 10 extremely strategic raw materials for those sites that are located on high risk locations only. So we're using Verisk Maplecroft to help us with the location, the high risk locations, and we apply that filter. That gives us roughly 300 places that we're targeting for the next 5 years, pretty much. So I just want to maybe take one more slide before am I okay on time, Oliver?
Yeah, you've got a couple of minutes. That's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. So we were talking about supplier engagement. I was trying to reflect. Okay, how do we tackle that for this program at Mars? You know, like supplier engagement is super important. I love the conversation we just had in the breakout room. I think to engage your suppliers, you need to have an engaged procurement team. That's foundational and first and foremost, right? So maybe the first step is making sure that procurement is engaged, understands, and can talk to their suppliers meaningfully about sustainability. Yeah. On a line on the code, we rely on suppliers to be educated enough to understand the code of conduct and the legalities associated to that. Well, that's not fair because most of our suppliers do not have that understanding at that maturity level. So we've put in place a guidance document that can be downloaded from our website as well, which is like a Bible of decomposing each expectation of the code. What does this mean in your workplace? What does good look like? What does bad look like? What examples of how you can properly implement those expectations? So there's a whole guidance that can be used both by the buyer and by the supplier to go deeper into those expectations. And then we have an escalation, and we make it, what I'm saying, make it real is, you know, if you're going to escalate a code, non-compliance or an unwillingness to align to the code, involve your leaders. So we have to have a sign-off of our regional VPs for procurement for every code that gets escalated to legal and for which we're going to try to find maybe an alternative solution. But that has to be approved at the VP level, because, hey, if you're in a leverage market, go with someone else, you know, like that. Let's not compromise our values just because we're about to sign a contract with a supplier when we have an opportunity to work with somebody. If we don't have an opportunity to work with somebody else, legal steps in, and an example, a good example is right now we have a very critical supplier who refuses to align to our code because they don't have provisions of child and forced labor for their own workplaces, which is a big issue for us. It is the CSO of Mars who's dealing with this right now. And he's happy. He thanked me, like, thank you very much for bringing this to me. The process is working. Yeah. So on Assess with EcoVadis, they have a huge amount of materials. They have a huge help center videos. Like, leverage this if you're using EcoVadis, of course. Walk the talk. We're assessing ourselves at Mars, and we're doing it at the corporate level. We're also doing it at the site level because we're asking our suppliers to assess at the site level. We need to be able to show that we're also doing this and be able to talk ourselves about what benefits that bring. Yeah. And invest. If your suppliers, let's say, you have a huge supplier that has 20 sites, they're going to have to spend $1,000 to assess each of their sites. That's not very attractive. And so we have pre-purchased some credits that we're giving out to suppliers to unlock this financial burden and get the ball rolling. Yeah. And for Advance, the first phase of our Engage program, of our Advanced program, is Engage, and it's substantial amount of time. So that's part of it. We need the buyers to be ready to think about what's this incentivization. How am I going to reward the sustainability performance of this strategic supplier? Yeah. I'm going to lock in a contract for 3 years instead of 1 year. Am I going to give them, I don't know. There's just so many things that the procurement, we call commercial procurement at Mars, but has at their hand. But that needs to be a thought through process. They need to be ready with, what is my supplier interested in? How am I going to incentivize their behaviors and their uptake on the program? And again, co-investment. I mean, these are heavy investments, and we're always happy to share the investment with our suppliers as and when needed. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Aurélie, that is fantastic. That is a really interesting. I know there will be lots of questions. So if people want to add their questions into the chat, we're going to just hear from the other speakers, and then we're going to answer questions as a group. And I'm very conscious of time, so I'm keen to sort of move on to the bit, but thank you for that. And we are recording the session, and Aurélie, I will check with you what slides you're able to share afterwards as well. So without further ado, on to Marsha Dixon of Better Buying, who's joined also by David Patet of Reckitt Benckiser RB, who again shared this story of how they're engaging their supply chain to really understand what they think of their buyers' purchasing practices, which is always an intriguing question to ask your suppliers. So Marsha, if I could ask you to kick off and then hand over to David after that to tell the story. And yeah, it'd be great to hear your experiences so far. If you're here, Marsha.
Great. Thank you, Oliver. Thanks for having us, and good morning, everybody in Texas. So Better Buying Institute is advocating for industry-wide transformation of buyer purchasing practices. And we're looking at that because we want to support business relationships that support buyers and suppliers in achieving not only their environmental and their social responsibility goals, but their financial goals. And so we're talking about poor purchasing practices, and those are the day-to-day business actions and decisions that can lead to systemic problems in the workspace, including things like excessive overtime and forced labor, poor wages, use of precarious labor, the temporary migrant labor without the rights.
Marsha, we can't hear you that well. Just I don't know if you want to speak up a little bit, or I think it's just the microphone's a little crackly, that's all.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me just
actually the computer. We won't take umbrage to that.
Hold on a sec.
Okay, how about that?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, same thing happened yesterday. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Okay, so I hope you got the gist of what we're trying to do at Better Buying to transform buyer purchasing practices. And so we're talking about things that impact, for example, excessive overtime, forced labor, poor wages, the use of precarious labor, and some health and safety risks sometimes associated with, for example, unauthorized subcontracting. And so while purchasing practices aren't the sole reason those problems exist, they can exacerbate them when suppliers aren't given enough time to do their work, when they're not given consistency of business, and when the financial sustainability of their organizations is in doubt. You know, because if you don't have a good, solid, financially stable supply chain partner, I don't know how you're going to think you can get out good things for workers in the environment. So essentially, purchasing practices have been, you know, there's growing consensus and understanding that those contribute to human rights violations, and so therefore they must be addressed. And so what we do is collect data from suppliers about their customers' purchasing practices, and that always takes a moment to say, no, this is not you evaluating your suppliers. There's a lot of that. It's your suppliers evaluating you and your customers, not an individual, but the practices. And so we have two different tools we use to collect data globally. Our primary index is called the Better Buying Purchasing Practice Index. And it's a detailed rating system where suppliers anonymously rate 7 categories of purchasing practices for the companies that buy their products. And what they do is provide objective business data, which is then aggregated and analyzed together. And then the reports to the companies tell brands and retailers which practices can be improved. And we launched that with a focus on apparel and textiles, but we've kind of been gradually adding in more of hard goods categories and things that are sold at general retail level. This tool is primarily used by tier 1 suppliers. The other tool we have is called the Better Buying Partner Index, and it's very short. It's a subjective survey that measures 11 areas of practices kind of at a high level to identify broad problems area. For example, does the supplier not have enough time? Are the financial arrangements working? Is there bribery present in the business relationship? And this partner index can be used in a variety of different industries and also multiple supply chains, you know, down to raw materials and packaging even. And David will share a little bit about that. So just to give you a little bit more, you know, we published a report a couple of weeks ago. Every year we published an annual report about the results of our Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index. And the exciting thing we're reporting this week is the meaningful progress that companies that are subscribing with us are making as a result of having that data, being able to see where they are, seeing how they compare with peers in the industry, and use that to motivate action within.
Excellent. So that was fantastic, Barsha, and we can obviously, there'll be lots of questions for you about this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
David, can I ask you, you've experienced this and you're one of the first to explore this outside of fashion and textiles. What's been your experience of perhaps the suppliers getting their own back and able to ask questions of you? If you're there, David.
If he's not, I get his time.
If I take myself off mute, this does seem to be the catchphrase of 2020.
This would be an important time to take yourself off mute, David.
Yeah, no. I realised that when I started talking, but no. Yeah, it's been quite an interesting experience, to be honest. Let me first sort of start by explaining, I would say, why we did this. Our company's purpose really is to protect, heal, and nurture in the relentless pursuit of a cleaner, healthier world. And with that purpose and the nature of a lot of our brands, we have a great potential to have a very positive impact on society from a social and also environmental standpoint. Consequently, in order for us to deliver that, we really need to source and manufacture our products in a way that respect human rights and the environment. And I think, you know, that sort of concept, that principle, our supply teams are fully aligned with. But what we really needed to understand really is to ensure that our day-to-day procurement activities or operations are facilitating the delivery of that ambition or I would say, aspiration rather than hindering it. And I think Marsha used a prime example earlier around working hours. I think this is a fantastic example, because if we want suppliers, for example, to comply with our requirements around working hours, we really need to make sure that our planning practices, our order lead times, actually enable them to do it, rather than calling up a week before and saying we all of a sudden need another 40% of a particular SKU and we need that delivered in a week's time. Clearly the supplier will say yes, and clearly the supplier will increase working hours to comply. So this is what we're trying to understand. And I think this was this sort of lens, coupled with, I would say, what we're seeing increased pressure from NGOs and wider civil society, such as Oxfam, around companies needing to engage their supply chain to better understand the impact their procurement practices have on their suppliers, for us, sold the case internally for us to do this exercise. So that was a little, Ollie, in terms of why we did it. Part of it is the values of the company. Secondary is obviously around external pressure. And I think there's also a third element of why we did this, and this is around the commercial benefits as well. Because I think, if we have better, more long-term collaborative partnership with suppliers, we will also deliver improved and increased supply chain resilience, increased quality, increased on-time delivery, a whole host of issues and benefits that I'm sure we're all aware of. In terms of our experience of doing this directly, it was the results didn't actually share anything overly surprising. The areas of improvement, no surprise, was around payment terms and planning, improvements in planning, which I'm sure is a common challenge for us all. In terms of the positives, we had positive feedback around RB being perceived as a preferred partner, our efforts to reduce duplicate audit requirements, and this is what we do through collaboration with peers around trying to merge into one audit our human rights, our environmental requirements, and then working with our quality teams to try to reduce the burden on suppliers, in addition to mutual recognition of audits from peer companies, such as a number of those on the call here today. So that was some of the sort of positive feedback received from suppliers. One area that was surprising was around some suppliers wanted further engagement on the sustainability agenda. And I think this comes back to now how we analyze the results in more detail, because at the moment, a lot of our sustainability activities focused on, similar to what Aurelie has just outlined, high-risk suppliers, in a lot of cases, high-risk geographies. That's where we're putting a lot of our resource and effort, focus and attention. So naturally, probably the European and North American suppliers felt that we weren't proactively engaging with them on the sustainability agenda. So, that's an opportunity for us not to forget them, for us maybe to engage with them, but in a more proactive, strategic sense around the sustainability agenda. In terms of next steps, if I may, Ollie, so that was some of the key results. In terms of next steps, the procurement teams found this really insightful. I think one of the challenges that they sort of posed before we conducted this pilot was, in a way, we already know what our strengths and weaknesses are. We know planning, payment terms will be weaknesses, and we know what some of our strengths are. So what's the value in doing this? I think the value is now we have, credible, tangible data that will now enable us to have meaningful, I would say, cross-functional discussions internally at a fairly senior level in the business to start looking at how we can improve the situation. For example, planning. It's not just procurement. It's a whole host of functions to get that right. So now we've got some insightful data from suppliers. Let's bring that to the Chief Supply Officer, and let's start having a discussion around what actions we potentially can take to improve that. So I think really, really insightful data, and this is something we will start looking at moving forward. A second bit of feedback that was received from procurement is we may not necessarily want all of our suppliers that we survey to consider us as a strategic partner. As we all know, we have strategic suppliers and we have tactical suppliers. So, clearly, you don't necessarily need to, I would say, cry over spilt milk if your tactical suppliers are not giving you, full ratings in all the areas that would put you in a more strategic sort of quadrant. But if your strategic suppliers that you deem as important to your business are grading you clearly as competitors or not, in a way that you would say reflects how you see them, then clearly there is some action that is required there. So just bear that in mind in terms of how you see your suppliers before going into conducting such a survey and any results that you have. And then the sort of final piece I would say is we need more companies to uptake this, because one of the feedback that we got when we got the result from our CPO was around how did we fare in comparison to peers? And I'm sure this is a question that we all ask, or we will all ask internally. And sadly, I had to say we don't know, because we have this is a pilot and it's the first time we've done this. So I think, you know, there really is a call to action. If we get more of us, more peer companies to conduct an assessment, it will obviously drive value internally, because it will enable you to identify opportunities to improve and to engage people internally around how you can improve your practices. But it will also enable a bit of an industry benchmark to be established, which will hopefully facilitate, I would say, a race to the top in terms of how we improve our procurement practices. So Ollie, I've tried to, in a nutshell, try to summarize those sort of points, but I'm open to any questions.
No, you're wonderfully eloquent as always, and thank you for that. That's really insightful. I mean, I think certainly the reflections of both presentations show that there is certainly an involvement of the way that procurement and buyers and companies are talking to their suppliers. Much more about collaboration, much more about dialogue, much more about strengthening relationships. The question in the past has always been, how do you do that at scale? So we've got about 10 minutes, which is a little bit less than I hoped for questions, but that's fine. That's mainly my fault for starting us late. But if anyone's got any particular questions, I know Aurelie has been fantastic at answering all the questions in the chat. So she's answered most of her questions already. So thank you for that, Aurelie. That saved me a big job. But has anybody got any particular questions for Marsha or David? And don't be shy.
Ollie, I have a question for David. You mentioned one of the bits of feedback that you'd gotten is about audits and trying to both integrate what you're doing within your organization across topics, but also across your organization. Could you share maybe a little bit more insight into how you coordinate that, again, internally and externally, to make that more efficient for your suppliers?
Sure. So internally, labor standards, so within the supply chain, labor standards, health and safety and environment is all captured by one team. So instead of the RB health and safety team, the RB human rights team, and the RB environment team doing their own audits, it all falls under my remit and my team's remit. So that already consolidates all of that activity into one audit. And then the only real other touch point is around quality audits. And what we have done in some markets is actually try to schedule some audits around the quality audit. So the quality auditor goes in for week 1, we go in week 2, and then the supplier is sort of done for the year from an audit standpoint. So that's what we do in terms of the logistics around audits. What we also do is from a sort of labor rights, health, safety and environment standpoint, or social compliance audit standpoint, we mutually recognize audits conducted for other customers if it meets certain requirements. So again, we would accept a SMETA audit that's been conducted by any customer, save us going in again. You know, if Unilever do an audit, we will recognize the Unilever responsible sourcing audit. So again, that does reduce the audit burden on suppliers.
Excellent.
So Bob, I hope that answers your question.
Lovely, thank you.
Yep, that's helpful, thank you.
Question for Aurelie. Aurelie, how far up your supply chain do you go with your new approach? And assume you're initially dealing with your 40,000 tier 1 suppliers. How far do you go with tier 2 or tier 3?
Yeah, so great question. We are organized in a way that we're targeting the two extreme points of our supply chain. My program, Next Gen Supplier, is really targeted at our first tier suppliers, the ones we have the commercial relationship with, or their last meaningful place of work, because sometimes you might be contracting with the office in New York, but you're really interested in the factories in, you know, Thailand. I don't know. So we're going to that tier, to that level where it is the last meaningful place of work with those that we have a relationship, a commercial relationship with, and we buy goods and services from. My colleagues, some of my colleagues are focusing on the origin work. So they are driving the programs that look at water, GHG, land, income, human rights, conditions of women, but the origin workplaces. And these are separate programs. the idea is that eventually we meet somewhere in the middle, but we decided to start at those two extremes of the supply chain.
Lovely, lovely. I'm going to stop it there, unfortunately, because we've got lots of people I know want to ask questions. But as I said, what we need to do is wrap up and share with you our next steps. So for many of you, you are 150 people over about 1,000 that have requested to join this call. I was too scared to allow 1,000 onto this call. So you're the very lucky 150 that were allowed. And in fact, there's still people coming in now. Thanks for the last few minutes. What I'd like to do is hand over to my colleague Sierra now. And Ashley, if you can bring the slides up, and she'll talk to you about what you can actually do now to actually carry on and take part in the Sustainable Procurement Pledge and where you can go to get your help. And I have a poll for all of you, which I'd like you to complete in a minute or so, where you can choose which challenge we discuss next over the next 2 months and what topic we will discuss in our call in the next 2 months' time. So Sierra, over to you, if you can show us what people need to do next.
Of course. So hi everyone, I just want to say I'm really excited to be here in a room with so many people who are equally as passionate about sustainability as I am, so that's great. But we really just kind of wanted to remind everyone that we have a lot of great content on our website published by our wonderful SPP ambassadors, and we would love for all of you to check it out. Our current challenge is on supplier engagement, as we discussed today. So we really look forward to your input and comments. Please share the posts if you find them interesting, because we really want to promote a community on our website. But with that being said, we would really love for you, all of you ambassadors, to vote and participate in what you think the next challenge should be. So here, I think the poll is already up. So here are the options. We have collaboration with peers, financing sustainability projects, supply chain carbon emissions, supply chain human rights, so social impact, transparency in supply chains, technology and innovation. I know we talked a little bit about that in my breakout room. And then we have circular economy. So please choose what you think we should talk about next for the next challenge.
You're deciding what a very committed volunteer group is going to focus on for the next 2 months. So choose something nice and easy, will you? It really helps. Thanks to everyone for joining us. We'd all like you to visit spp.earth. Okay, that is our new website that we'll be working on. There's obviously our LinkedIn group, which you can follow for more content. We have over 2,000 ambassadors as part of the SVP initiative so far. Obviously, with 1,000 people wanting to attend this meeting, we're on the up. And we're aiming to get to 1 million procurement professionals. What a fantastic number, which will be really exciting when I host that Zoom call. But we're aiming to get to 1 million ambassadors ultimately, and that will enable us to drive phenomenal impact across procurement and supply chain. So tell your friends and family and peers about the SPP. Come join us on spp.earth. And on behalf of all of my colleagues and friends, thank you for joining. Thank you for all being so well behaved. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to our speakers, Aurelie, David and Marsha. That was excellent. Please do follow up with them. And we'll see you hopefully for a much better 2021. I hope we all believe that. And we'll be catching up. And it looks like we'll be talking about technology and innovation in supply chains in probably January. So thank you all. Stay in touch and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you very much.